Deep under the frozen woods of the Boreal Valley lie the crumbling ruins of the profaned capital. The gold and silver-filled halls are but a shadow of their former glory, and a warning to every lost visitor stepping on the capital's marble floors. Not even wealth and power could stop the curse that in second wiped out one of the most advanced cultures in its period. Only few survived this tragedy, and among them is Yorm, the reclusive lord of Cinder who forsook his final duty. The profaned capital hasn't always been called like that. It once was a thriving and advanced culture, a city built by man for man, and a landmark for its neighbor kingdoms. To better define the picture of its former glory, we could compare the capital to the ancient Greek city of Athens, a city-state founded by the wisdom of its people, rather than with brute force like many other realms. Few elements remain today to tell us how complex its society was. There definitely had been an upper aristocratic class, of which the surviving jailers and court handmaidens were part of. Actually, they might be one and the same thing, though their current roles in the Dark Souls universe make me believe that they are of different genders, the handmaidens being female, while the jailers might be male only. Another very important and prestigious class was that of the court sorcerers. Thanks to the wealth of their city, they could dedicate their entire life in studying magic without any boundaries of sorts. Their knowledge was immense, while they also claimed heirship to Big Cat Logan's legacy. In fact, the profaned capital housed one of the two leading schools of magic, the other probably being the one in Lothric or at Vinheim. The same way the twin crystal sages wore big hats to imitate Master Logan, the capital sorcerers emulated his staff to claim their lead. But the tall dark headpiece and former gold stitching suggests they may have also been oracles. What probably once was their temple is now inhabited only by one last surviving scholar, hiding on the roof of the building, desperate to protect Logan's scroll from what lies underneath him, at the entrance of the church. Here are the Monstrosities of Sin, beastly humanoid creatures whose faces have mutated into gigantic dark hands, while their body is covered with teeth and eyes. A truly horrifying scene, but not so unfamiliar as it might seem. A second look at them reveals striking similarities with him whom was given the Latin name of Hand, Manus, Father of the Abyss. But why the latter is by a rage and love-driven creature, mutated into the most primordial form of humanity, the Monstrosities of Sin are but the final involution caused by their own curse. Upon killing the first of these beings, we get Eleonora, a strange weapon found among malformed inhabitants of the profaned capital. Perhaps it even holds the name of the one wielding it. The profane flame was triggered by the curse of these women, relatives of a certain oracle, but despite their culpability, they went on living without any cares. So the sin they are culpable of is the profane flame, a careless experiment which would soon after doom themselves and entire city, a curse for every living human. Let's for a moment dive deeper into the nature of their unforgivable abomination by looking up a more literal Japanese translation. The profane flame is better to be translated as the flame of sin. This newly acquired nuance actually brings up memories of two other known sins. The first one being the linking of the fire, which presumably created the undead curse and of which Lord Alia was the scholar. While the other one is the attempt of the Witch of Izalith of recreating the first flame, but actually giving birth to chaos and all the horrors that came with it. So it seems like as a sin is the manipulation of a primordial force of nature, more specifically one of the four souls of power. So can we assume that the sin the woman of the oracle had committed had been that of experimenting on the first flame, perhaps even the Dark Souls itself? That would explain why their own humanity seemed to have been contaminated by it, because the dark nature of the creatures they had become goes beyond the pure aesthetical similarities with Manus. They are also known to be weak against the Wolf Knight Greatsword, a weapon of Artorias famous for dealing extra damage against abyssal foes. Surprisingly, we can also risk to explain who the Oracle they are relatives of is, as only one other NPC holds this epithet, the silent Oracle of Eleum Lois Elserna, child of Manus. I don't think she was directly involved in the events of the City of Sin, as it is more likely that upon her death her soul was scattered in many smaller fragments, which then took the form of her children. A process that I didn't make up, as it is exactly how Elserna and her sisters came to be. This could indirectly be confirmed by another child of the Abyss, Carla.
This is a land of monstrosities, and I am no exception. But I'm guilty, a wretched child of the Abyss. Is that something you can forgive?
Releasing her from her imprisonment rewards us with the chance of obtaining 2 unique dark sorceries, one being Affinity, a forbidden sorcery of Manus that casts a dark manifestation of humanity, while the other one being the Dark Edge, also a forbidden dark sorcery. It is passed from mother to daughter and was intended for both protection and as a means of taking one's own life. The young girl never swung it more than once. I am of the idea that this young girl is Carla herself, so of course she is alive and therefore didn't use this hex to take her own life, leaving only one other option. It is my opinion that Carla might have used the Dark Edge to protect herself. She wasn't the only one to have tried desperately everything in her power to overcome the curse. A body near the creatures of the Abyss hold purging stones, the oldest known way to cure a curse, but unfortunately this one was of a different kind. So what happened after the Flame of Sin was created? Was the city destroyed because of it? Well, no, or at least not in the near future. It's at this point I believe that Yhorm was asked by the very people once subjugated to lead them, serving as both weighty blade and a stone-hard shield. So he definitely was not the city's genuine king, if there had been any, but its conqueror. And of an ancient conqueror he is the descendant. People have been discussing who this mentioned character is, some arguing it is Wilnir, while others are convinced it is the Giant Lord of Dark Souls 2. It's definitely important considering both hypotheses, even though I myself am more likely to believe that the mentioned ancient conqueror is the Giant Lord. It looks unsuitable to call Volnir an ancient relative of Yhorm, firstly because they are both alive to some extent, and they both seem to still exercise their power upon their own lands, making their simultaneous ruling look a bit bizarre, but this is just my opinion. So Yhorm might be the ancient lord's relative, and I really don't find any reason why they couldn't be like that. They are of course both giants, while the fact that Yhorm underneath his hull hides a humanoid face looks to me like a pure design choice. Miyazaki's intention of combining the designs used in the previous 2 games to finally appease all those enraged gamers who didn't understand what the relation between the 2 giant species was, or who simply didn't like the butt faces used in Dark Souls 2. Either way, comparing Yhorm side by side with the Giant Lord sustains this idea of a design assimilation between the 2 previous iterations. As a lord, Yhorm risked everything and fought unflinchingly as a one-man vanguard, but following the loss of the one he wished to protect, he forsook his shield. In place of it, a left-hand notch was added to his machete, enabling the smashing technique that would become the legacy of his later years. Who this mentioned character was is not clear, only speculation may fill this plot hole. What is known is that this was not the only negative event that distinguished his ruling. Despite being a very efficient protector of his people, they don't seem to have liked him very much, and Yhorm knew full well that those who spoke of him as a lord were quite insincere. The reason for this harbored hate might be found in his nature. After all, he was a giant and a conqueror, so perhaps the inhabitants of this city couldn't overtake that skepticism. So then why did they ask him to lead him in the first place? I think the answer is greed. The people of the Profaned capital over time had piled up enormous amounts of treasures, as some of it is still covering the floors of the city. But that doesn't seem to have been enough for them. They carried rusted gold coins and used them to further increase their richness. And Yhorm was an effective tool to enrich the city even more, or at least to keep its interests safe. A golden opportunity, they might have thought. The body of leathersmith Gilligan can be found here, and he is not known for being generous. He was in fact driven by his lust for bigger treasures, and the Profaned capital was definitely the right place to appease his momentum. The reason we find him dead might be a link to the next event. It appears as if the flame of sin started to become a problem that needed to be addressed, or perhaps this was the time of its creation. But no one knew how to stop it, so it was Yorm who eventually decided to put it to rest, sacrificing himself perhaps as a last attempt to be accepted by the people over whom he was ruling, or simply for his sense of duty. Lonely Yorm became a lord of Cinder to put the profaned flame to rest, knowing full well that those who spoke of him as a lord were quite insincere. But before he carried out his task, he gave 2 storm rulers, one to his people and one to a dear friend, to mitigate the doubts of his folk. The mentioned friend is well known to be Sigurd of Katarina, who pledged himself to this duty and therefore helps us to eventually kill Yorm. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Everything settled, he offered himself to the fading first flame, in a less desperate attempt to redeem himself and to protect his people. But unfortunately his endeavor should prove to have failed miserably. The Profaned capital was consumed by a fire after Yorm the giant became a lord of Cinder. The fire, born of the sky, is said to have incinerated not by human flesh. Like when water is added to boiling oil, so did Yorm's sacrifice catalyze the first sin, a colossal flame that engulfed the entire city, melting and ripping off the skins of its inhabitants. Some of these horrifying remains can be found while entering the throne room, suggesting that they must have desperately tried to find shelter inside its massive walls. But the scale of this burst of fire couldn't be stopped by anything man-made, finding its way inside the wall and killing every last human. But why was the flame triggered by Yorm's sacrifice? It is theorized that him being a giant and not a human might be the reason for it, but I personally have another opinion. We said that the flame was probably a product of darkness, and darkness is known to feed from humans' most beastly emotions like love and hate. It is my very own idea that perhaps the hate the people harbored for their former leader could have triggered the flame upon Yorm's linking the fire, thus consuming themselves as only humans had been touched by its curse. Is it therefore a mere coincidence that the Profaned coal is necessary to create dark and hollow weapon infusions? After all, it consists of the remnants of the fire that burned down the Profaned capital, preserved in an icy skull. The real explanation for this tragedy might be lost forever, so perhaps we will never know. Well, all this is definitely enough to tell why, in our present days, lonely Yorm doesn't want to link the fire anymore. Too many bad memories are linked to his duty. No wonder that by the time we face him with the help of Sigurd, he seems to have gone mad. The later events of the city are strictly connected to those of Pontiff Sullivan, so we'll talk about them in their own video. What I will do now is briefly talk about a possible connection this city has with Dark Souls 2. Of course, we already said that Gilligan can be found dead here, but there's even more than meets the eye. The Profaned Flame sorcery isn't unique to Dark Souls 3, it is also available in Dark Souls 2 with the name of Flameswathe. Here it is stated to be a pyromancy devised by Straight of Ulathis, a powerful NPC. Straight was invited to the old kingdom of Ulathis for his wisdom, but its death was such that people soon feared him, and in the end Straight was led into a dreadful trap. Straight spent several lifetimes as stone. During this hiatus, kingdoms rose and fell, until the land called Drangleic came to be. Ulathis, the place where he created the mentioned spell, was therefore a past kingdom, before the time of Drangleic. Is it possible that the lost name of the Profaned capital is Ulathis? The crack in Things Betwixt definitely bears some similarities to the one at the Profaned capital. But still, it seems a bit absurd, because how could Yorm rule over a kingdom before his ancestor conquered Drangleic? And how could Gilligan be still alive at Majula if we found him dead at the capital? These paradoxes make me believe that what links the two cities is a mere reference, nothing more, though it is interesting to speak about it nonetheless.